happening to the valuations of corporate bonds in America? Because that's perhaps the reason behind Old Mutual's recent good performance.
I mean, one thing is that we are seeing a recovery in issuance. We are seeing spreads tightening, and we just
What does that mean?
Spreads basically is an indication of the risk premium on a bond. And for instance, just look at issuance. When we had October last year, the demise of Lehman Brothers, bond markets basically shut down. And earlier this year, the only issuance we would see would be government bonds. Or like in Europe, we would have had a lot of banks basically issuing with government guarantees, which made it government risk again, the Irish banks, the Spanish banks, the French, the Germans. Now, in the meantime, over the last couple of weeks, actually, we have seen banks in Europe, for instance, we have seen them come back to the markets without government guarantees. We have seen corporates come back. And at the moment, I've just looked at some data for Europe. We have weekly issuance of bonds, that's governments, banks, corporates, in the order of somewhere between 40 billion euros to 60 billion euros, depending on where we are. The situation still is volatile. I mean, a bit of bad news still can blow it out completely.
But it's much improved from where it was last September.
Oh, absolutely, and not to mention October, November, when we were staring into the abyss.
But just getting back to the valuation of American corporate bonds, have they improved lately?
They have, and I didn't bring the spreads along actually for the U.S. bonds, but just a measure, and one probably can safely assume that U.S. bonds would perhaps behave very similarly. You take the iTraxx, which is an index for bond spreads in Europe, and you take the 5-year iTraxx for corporates. We have seen over the last couple of weeks only, we have seen the spread, this risk premium basically, come down from over 200 basis points to 125 basis points.
All right, so that's why Old Mutual's doing better. What about South Africa? Are South African companies approaching the bond market more?
You certainly hear a lot when you hear a lot about the bond market when you talk to corporate treasurers. I mean, historically, you look at South Africa as being an equity play, and corporates had very strong balance sheets. They had their stable banking relationships with banks providing evergreen, fee-free overdraft facilities. Now with Basel II and banks being sort of very careful with regards to lending, with regards to growing their balance sheet, corporate treasurers are thinking more about like how can they use their balance sheet, and one form is actually for raising capital or raising funds really is the bond market. Now, one thing that actually could throw a bit of a spanner in the works here, and the corporate bond market has been a fledgling bond market in South Africa for some time, in hopes there was always a hope that it would take off, in particular over recent years as government was pulling out of the bond market when it was running the small surpluses we had seen. Now with government back in like big time, in particular with the revenue shortage they recently announced, I really would see the risk again that they will crowd out
squeeze out
issuers.
the private sector.
Yeah.
David, it's always been a hope in this country that we would find bonds as being an alternative for private investors. Everybody seems to know about shares nowadays, but we haven't yet clicked as far as bonds are concerned.
They haven't been promoted on the bond exchange. I'm hoping that Russell now, the JSE that it owns the bond exchange, will start to promote more retail type bonds in corporate issues, because it just adds more flavor to your investment portfolio. So I certainly support it, and there's you get slightly higher yields than you can get in the bank. So I would certainly support and hope that we develop that market.
They've built